Almost home, Max. Just a few more blocks. What's that? Well, look at this. Out for a little stroll, are we? Guess she's got a dog to lead her since she can't see where she's going. I don't want any trouble. Please, let me pass. Oh, don't worry, sweetheart. We're just having a bit of fun. What's the matter? Too good to talk to us. What's it like, huh? Being blind and knocked up? You must really have it rough. Max isn't just a dog. He's my partner. And he's trained to handle people like you. What's this? Your mud thinks he's a guard dog. Cute. You think I'm weak because I can't see? Let me tell you something. I've faced worse than this, worse than you. And I'm still standing. Maybe we should just leave her alone. This isn't worth it. Let's go. You're my hero, Max. Always. The night was thick with tension. The street, usually quiet, was swallowed by darkness, the glow of a single flickering streetlight the only source of light. Ella stood alone at the edge of the sidewalk, clutching her bag tightly, her heartbeat louder than the engine roars that reverberated in the air. The low growl of motorcycles came closer, growing in volume with each passing second, and soon she could see them: bikers, their leather jackets gleaming in the moonlight, their faces shadowed under the hoods of their helmets. Before she could take another step, the bikes screeched to a halt, surrounding her. The riders dismounted in slow, deliberate motions, the sound of their boots hitting the pavement like a countdown. Ella felt a chill creep up her spine. Her breath caught, and for a moment, the world around her seemed to shrink, every muscle in her body freezing as if under a spell. Look what we have here, a voice broke through the silence, heavy with mockery. Ella's eyes darted around, trying to make sense of her surroundings, but the bikers were too close now. Their stares cut through the air like daggers, hungry, malicious. Where you think you're going, sweetheart? Another one sneered, a toothy grin creeping across his face as he approached her slowly. Ella's grip tightened on her bag. Her instincts screamed to run, to flee, but something deeper inside her held her still. She wasn't just running from them, she was running from every injustice she'd ever faced. The harassment, the looks, the whispers. She'd been the target of so many like them before. Don't bother, girl, a third voice called out, the speaker leaning in, his breath hot against her face. You ain't gonna outrun us. Ella's mind raced. She could feel her pulse quickening, but in the pit of her stomach, something else stirred, an anger she hadn't known she could feel. She was sick of being scared, sick of letting people like them dictate her worth. The way they saw her, the assumptions they made about her life, her value, it all made her sick. The bikers' laughter filled the air, harsh and grating. Ella's eyes flicked toward the ground, her fingers trembling around her bag. Focus, she whispered under her breath, summoning every ounce of strength she had left. Her mind flashed to her past, the years of feeling small, the times she'd been reduced to nothing by people who didn't even know her. But then, the image of her baby, still growing inside her, steadied her. The thought of protecting that child, of keeping them safe from a world that didn't care, lit a fire in her chest. No. Not again. Not this time. She lifted her head, meeting the eyes of the biker closest to her. Leave me alone, she said, her voice low but firm, steady despite the tremor she felt deep within. The leader of the group, taller than the rest, with a scar running down his cheek, chuckled darkly. He took a step forward, the others following suit. Yeah? Or what? He mocked, his hand reaching out toward her arm. You gonna make us? Ella's heart raced, but as his fingers grazed her sleeve, a sudden, low growl cut through the air. Max. Her body tensed as she heard him before she saw him, a large silhouette emerging from the shadows. The growl was deep, almost primal, and it caused the bikers to pause, their collective movement freezing for a heartbeat. Ella didn't have to look, she knew exactly where he was. She knew he'd stand by her. The bikers hesitated, their confidence faltering for just a moment. Not so tough when it's not just one woman, huh? Max's voice was a deep rumble, low and commanding. Ella felt a rush of relief, though her resolve remained unshaken. Max was by her side now, but she wouldn't let him do all the work. Not this time. The leader turned his gaze toward Max, sizing him up, but there was something in Max's posture attention, like the calm before a storm that made the biker pause. "You should have stayed in the shadows," the leader muttered, his bravado starting to crack. He took a hesitant step back, eyes still trained on Max. Ella's breathing steadied as she found her voice again. Her hands dropped from her bag, her posture shifting. She no longer felt weak, no longer felt like prey. "You think because you intimidate people, you win." She spoke up, her voice gaining strength with each word. "You think you can just take whatever you want from whoever you want? Not anymore." The bikers fell silent, the atmosphere thick with tension as Ella's words hung in the air, solid and unyielding. "I'm not scared of you," she continued, standing tall, her chin lifted. "And I won't let you scare me into silence." Max stepped forward, his broad frame shadowing hers. The biker leader, eyes narrowing, opened his mouth to retort, but something in the air had changed. The pack wasn't unified anymore. There were uncertain glances, little cracks in their once imposing facade. Ella didn't look at Max, but she felt him there, a silent promise that he had her back. The leader of the bikers, his posture shifting, seemed to consider her words. The power dynamic had shifted. Ella had found her courage, and it unsettled them. One of the bikers shifted uneasily, muttering something to his friend, and for the first time, the air wasn't filled with laughter or threats. It was filled with doubt. The leader hesitated, and without a word, the group began to back off. The motorcycles roared to life again, and the once menacing presence started to fade into the darkness, leaving behind only the echoes of their departure. Max stayed close to Ella as the last of the bikers vanished. For a moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the streetlight and the distant hum of the city. Ella took a deep breath. She hadn't just won the confrontation, she had won something deeper. Her fear had been replaced with resolve, and she had proven, if only to herself, that she wasn't going to back down anymore. "Thanks," she whispered to Max, but the words felt too small to capture what she really felt. Max's eyes softened. He didn't need to say anything. The protection he offered wasn't just physical, it was a reminder that sometimes, standing up was the hardest part. Together, they stood in the quiet aftermath, knowing that whatever came next, they were ready. The roar of motorcycles filled the air like thunder, a menacing soundtrack that seemed to swallow Ella whole. Her hands trembled at her sides as she fought to keep her breathing steady. The group of bikers circled closer, their mocking laughter cutting through the cold night. "Guess you thought you could just waltz through here without saying hello," one of them sneered, his eyes gleaming with predatory intent. Ella's chest tightened, but she refused to let the fear consume her. She couldn't afford to not now. Her voice quavered as she spoke, but there was strength behind her words. "Stay back," she said, her chin lifting slightly. "I don't want any trouble." The leader of the group, a burly man with a jagged scar that traced the line of his jaw, chuckled darkly. He stepped forward, his boots scuffing against the pavement with deliberate slowness. "Trouble?" he echoed, his tone dripping with mockery. "You think you can give us orders, sweetheart?" The others laughed, their voices a grating chorus that made Ella's stomach churn. One of them, younger and wiry, lunged toward her bag, his hand outstretched. The world seemed to slow as Ella's breath caught in her throat. Before the biker could reach her, a flash of motion blurred the scene, followed by a sharp, commanding bark that pierced the tension like a knife. "Max!" The loyal dog leapt forward, his muscles coiled with precision, teeth bared in a warning that was impossible to ignore. The biker stumbled back with a startled yelp, his bravado evaporating as quickly as it had surfaced. "Jesus," one of the bikers hissed, his eyes wide. "That mud's crazy." Max didn't waver, his gaze locked on the group, his growl low and steady. He was a wall of muscle and resolve, his presence an unspoken declaration that Ella was no longer alone. The leader's smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing as he tried to reclaim control of the situation. "You think a dog's gonna scare us off?" He spat, though his voice lacked its former confidence. "Get a hold of yourselves, boys. It's just an act." But it wasn't. And they all knew it. Ella stepped forward, her hands still shaking but her voice gaining strength. "He's not just a dog," she said, her words deliberate. "And I'm not just some scared woman you can push around." Her heart pounded as the words left her lips. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to stop, to run, to do anything but stand her ground. But she couldn't back down. Not now. The leader glared at her, his jaw tightening. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But guts won't save you." "Maybe not," Ella replied, her voice unwavering now. "But fear won't stop me either." The tension in the air was electric, the bikers shifting uneasily under the weight of her defiance. Max's growl deepened, his body a coiled spring ready to unleash if they dared make another move. The wiry biker, still rubbing the spot where Max's teeth had nearly made contact, muttered under his breath. "Maybe we should just go, man. She's not worth it." "Shut up," the leader snapped, though his tone lacked its earlier bite. Ella seized the moment, her voice cutting through the din. "You've already lost," she said, her gaze steady. "You think this makes you powerful? Picking on people who can't fight back. It doesn't. It just makes you weak." The leader's face darkened, his fists clenching at his sides. But he didn't move. None of them did. Max let out a single, sharp bark, and it was as though the spell had been broken. One by one, the bikers began to step back, their earlier confidence replaced by an unspoken unease. The leader lingered for a moment longer, his eyes locked with Ella's. "You're lucky," he muttered finally, his voice low and bitter. "Next time, you won't be." Ella didn't flinch, didn't look away. "There won't be a next time," she said, her words firm. With a final glare, the leader turned, motioning for the others to follow. The roar of their engines filled the air once more as they retreated, their shadows swallowed by the night. The silence that followed was deafening. Ella's knees threatened to give way as the adrenaline began to fade, leaving her chest hollow and her hands trembling. Max turned to her, his eyes soft now, the tension in his body melting away. Ella dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around him. The tears came then, hot and unrelenting, a release of everything she'd held inside. "You saved me," she whispered into his fur, her voice cracking. "You always save me." Max licked her cheek, his tail wagging gently, as if to say, "That's what I'm here for." For the first time in what felt like forever, Ella allowed herself to feel safe. The darkness no longer seemed so suffocating, the echoes of the bikers' laughter nothing more than distant memories. She pulled back, wiping her tears, and looked into Max's eyes. "We did it," she said softly. "We stood up to them." Max tilted his head, his gaze steady and full of understanding. Together, they rose, the night stretching out before them, no longer a threat but a promise of new beginnings. The small cafe buzzed with murmurs, the hum of voices carrying the weight of awe and admiration. Ella sat quietly at a corner table, her fingers wrapped around a warm mug of tea. Across from her, an older woman leaned forward, her face alight with a mix of concern and admiration. "I'm telling you, Ella," the woman said, her voice steady yet touched with emotion, "what you did was incredible. And Max. That dog is a hero in this town. Ella offered a faint smile, her fingers tightening around the mug. I just did what anyone would have done, she replied softly, though the weight of her words suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Not everyone would have stood their ground, the woman countered. Most would have walked away, maybe even run. But you showed us all what bravery looks like. The words hung in the air, and Ella felt the heat rise to her cheeks. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. Still, a small flicker of pride stirred within her, a warmth she hadn't felt in years. As the door to the cafe swung open, a group of neighbors entered, their faces lighting up at the sight of her. One of them, a young man in his 20s, approached hesitantly. "Hey, Ella," he said, his voice tentative but genuine. "I just wanted to say, what you did out there, it meant a lot. To all of us. My little sister heard about it, and she said it made her feel like she could stand up for herself too." Ella's throat tightened, and for a moment, she struggled to find her voice. "Thank you," she managed, her words thick with emotion. That means more than you know." The group nodded, lingering for a moment before retreating to another table. Ella glanced down at Max, who sat obediently by her feet, his tail thumping softly against the floor. She reached down to scratch behind his ears, her voice barely above a whisper. "We've come a long way, haven't we, boy?" Max tilted his head, his eyes warm and knowing. The meeting at the community center later that week was packed, standing room only. Ella sat near the front, watching as people filed in, their faces a mix of determination and hope. A man in a neatly pressed shirt stepped up to the podium, clearing his throat. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice carrying over the low murmurs. "We're here because of Ella. Her courage reminded us that we have a responsibility to each other. This neighborhood isn't just a collection of houses. It's a community." The crowd broke into a round of applause, and Ella felt herself sinking into her chair, equal parts humbled and overwhelmed. The man continued, outlining plans for a neighborhood watch program, volunteer patrols, and workshops on self-defense. As the room buzzed with energy, Ella couldn't help but feel a growing sense of pride. Later that evening, as she walked home, Max trotting by her side, Ella reflected on the past few weeks. The fear, the doubt, the overwhelming sense of isolation, it had all seemed insurmountable. And yet, here she was, stronger than she'd ever imagined she could be. Stopping at the small park near her home, she sat on a bench, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. Max hopped up beside her, his head resting on her lap. "You know," she said softly, running her fingers through his fur, "I used to think I couldn't make a difference. That I was just invisible." Her voice caught, but she pressed on. "But now, I know better. And it's because of you." Max let out a soft huff, his tail wagging as if to say, "I knew it all along." The first time Ella stood in front of an audience to share her story, her hands shook so badly she thought she might drop the microphone. But as she looked out at the faces before her, young, old, some familiar, some not, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. "I'm not a hero," she began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "I'm just someone who decided to stop being afraid. And if I can do that, so can you." The room erupted into applause, and Ella felt a tear slip down her cheek. It wasn't just her story anymore, it was theirs too. In the weeks and months that followed, Ella became a beacon of resilience in her community. She spoke at schools, local events, and even city council meetings, her words sparking conversations about unity and the power of standing together. And through it all, Max was by her side, a constant reminder of the night that changed everything and the strength she'd found within herself. As she looked out at yet another crowd, their faces alight with hope, Ella realized something profound: she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And she wasn't doing it alone.